Hello, welcome to our second video on Introduction to SolidWorks. This is again part of the engineering graphics course. So what we're going to be doing is kind of start building 3D objects now. So 3D objects is basically what you would be wanting to do. Essentially, previously we talked about how do you create a 2D sketch. Now, once assuming you're now experts in 2D sketches, we want to actually go use the 2D sketch to make 3D objects. And if you're doing more complex stuff, you can actually export the 3D sketch, 3D model, excuse me, and then have it printed in any of your 3D printers. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So this are the list of topics we're going to be doing. So first we'll look at an L-shaped object. To make life a little bit more interesting, I'm going to be looking at different ways you can actually create this L-shaped using different directional extrusion. Next, we'll try to build a more complex shape, and then we'll talk about revolves to build cylindrical or axisymmetric features, and then we'll talk about sweeps, and then finally I'll give you like a really brief taste of direct modeling. So we wouldn't spend too much time on direct modeling itself. Okay. So before we continue, we have to recall that we would be using our constraints, the dimensional constraints, which would be distances, lengths, and angles. We'll use positional constraints, which are going to be coincidence, collinearity, point on a line, and so on, and as well as geometric constraints when building our shapes. We, as a good practice, would typically want our sketches to be fully constrained. It's important that you do not fix more than one vertex, because if you fix more than one vertex, what will happen is your dimensional values will not take full effect, and if you make a sketch and your neighbor, or more generally if your colleague makes a sketch, if you're working for a company, they would actually be in different shapes and they would not actually match up. So you want to basically use mostly dimensional constraints as far as possible. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what's known as an extrude. So an extrude, what we're going to do is think about essentially pulling a shape, be it a rectangle, triangle, whatever you'd have. So you're essentially pulling it out of the sheet of paper. So what we are actually going to be building is the L shape that I actually was showing to you last time. So this is my L shape, like an L shape. So we're going to try to build this particular object. So obviously the easiest way to do would be to actually create this L like so, and then try to pull it out of your sheet, so which will kind of give you this particular shape. As I'm trying to kind of challenge you and motivate you to actually learn SolidWorks, we are not actually going to do that particular method. What we're going to do is try to see, we're going to extrude, we'll call this the x-axis, and then this is the z-axis. So I'm going to see if I can actually extrude it along this direction and also along this particular direction. So I'm going to extrude along those particular ways. So the first one is if I'm going to extrude it along this direction, so what I can potentially do is create this block first, and then essentially create this block here. So I'm going to create this block here. So I'm going to create this one first, and then this one. That's the first way of doing it. And then the second one is we're going to see if we can do it slightly differently. And then finally we look at this view, which is known as the top view, and then we'll think about actually creating this particular shape and then extruding it this, and then this one a little bit this way. So this is what we're going to be focusing on right now. So to illustrate, so this is a 3D object. I'm going to create the left shape and then try to paste this particular shape onto this face. So, and then the next one we'll do is actually extrude it along two separate directions. Okay, so I have a nice looking new window set up here, and then we're going to do our first view. Remember I told you I'm not actually going to create it on the front plane and then extrude it this way. I'm actually going to make it a little bit more interesting, and then I'm going to start my sketch on the right plane. So instead of using lines, I'm going to use rectangles, which makes my life a little bit easier. And then I'm going to do this. You can actually create a different types of rectangle. It will most likely show you the last rectangle you used. So my rectangle, I'm going to use kind of a corner rectangle here. I'm going to click here. So notice this little blue dashed line, which kind of gives you some constraint, implicit constraint. I'm going to try to not use the constraint and then set the constraint later on. So I'm going to click here, and then what I'm going to do is, instead of fixing this particular vertex, I'm going to select this vertex and then the origin and then make them coincidental. So this automatically fixes this line and this line. Notice we already have 4 constraints. So this line and this line are horizontal, this one and this one is vertical, so this is already set up. If I don't like one particular constraint, I can actually select just the constraint, not the line. I'm going to select this green box, and then if I hit delete, this line is no longer going to be vertical, so I can actually move it, and then this is no longer vertical. If I want to get it back, I'll click on this line, and the context menu gives me these options. I can make it vertical again. Alternately, I can also make this line parallel to the other perpendicular line, the other vertical line. So this will also have the same effect. Next, what I'm going to do is actually add dimensional constraint. So this one is called the smart dimension. So you have the option of either doing horizontal, vertical, or if you wanted to do more fancy dimensions, so you can do that as well. I'm going to leave it as smart dimensioning. We'll make this to be, say, 80. And then we're going to make this to be, say, 100. So now my sketch is fully constrained. I can't actually drag any of these particular values. If I change this to, say, 160, and then I zoom out, and then notice that this is twice as tall as its width, I can actually move this position here or there. That doesn't really affect my sketch. So it's usually recommended that you start saving your drawing as soon as you make small modifications. So I'm going to hit Control S. And then I have my path that I'm going to use here, and then we'll call this anything you want. So we're going to call this video 2, and then this is exercise A, and then the extension is going to be part, SolidWorks part. So I'm just going to say save, and then henceforth I'll just hit Control S, and then it'll automatically keep saving my particular drawing. So now I have this particular view, and then I'm going to hit Control 7 to give you the isometric view. This is not really needed. What I'm going to do is, as soon as I select the sketch, it will give me the option to either like modify the sketch or suppress it. I don't need this. What I'm going to do is click on Extrude. When I do extrude, I can do several ways. We can basically extrude it from the sketching plane. So if you recall, this was a sketching plane. So I can either extrude it from the sketching plane, in which case I can make it blind, which basically means I don't care. I just go to that particular distance. So I can make it potentially 40 here. If I made a mistake, I can just go back and then hit 40. So now this is basically extruded to 40 units. I can make it up to a vertex. Right now we don't have any vertices, and I can make it like mid-plane, which will basically make it symmetric. Right now I'm going to go back and make it blind. You can actually go ahead and explore these ones. So this is a draft which gives you kind of an angle. So if I make it like, say, 20 degrees, so this actually would orient the faces in one particular direction. So I don't want the draft here, so I'm going to remove it here. So I'm done with this, and then save it again. Next, what I'm going to do is to stick the second part of the leg onto this. So essentially we would basically select this face and then create a rectangle here. So select here, and then I'm going to select new sketch. Make sure you don't select edit sketch, you select new sketch, and then we'll create a rectangle here, and then say okay. What I'm going to do is orient this and say normal to view. Now what I'm going to do is use the existing geometry and then constrain these new lines to my previous sketch. So I'm going to select this, and then make it collinear. I select this one, make it collinear. I'm going to select this line, and then make it collinear. So now the only thing that can change is this line. If I wanted to make this a complete square, what I can do is either give it a dimension and then give it a particular value, or what I can do is select this one, this line, and then say I want to make it equal. Right? So this will ensure that this height is always equal to this particular value. Now notice that I haven't actually given any dimension. Now if I try to force a dimension, if I basically say add dimension and then say, okay, hey, you know what, I'm going to add the dimension here, then it'll say, do you want to make it a driven dimension? So what that means is this is kind of like a reference value. I can't actually edit any of these values. I can only change it if I go back to the original sketch and change the dimension for that particular location. So now I'm going to exit the sketch and then go back, and then I'm going to extrude this sketch. So select this sketch, features, extrude. I'm going to go maybe another 40, or maybe go for an 80, and then say okay. Right. So now my L isn't very symmetric. So what I'm going to do is go back and say, you know what, maybe this should have been 80. And then if I say okay, you'll notice that everything is automatically moved because this sketch was starting from this particular plane. What has actually happened is the reference has moved, and then the face has automatically moved there as well. Right. So this is the first way to create our particular view. So we were basically extruding along the X direction. I'm going to show another way you can also extrude along the X direction. So what I'm going to do is actually create on the front plane and then extrude the whole rectangle one way and then the little rectangle the other way. So let's just do Control N, new part, and then what I'm going to do is the front is on the right plane, create this. What I'm going to do is really quickly create my rectangle. I'm going to add my smart dimension here. And then we'll make this 40. Oops, 80. And now this is fixed. So what I'm going to do next is basically add a line between these two midpoints. So now this line is actually fully constrained because it's constrained to the midpoint. This cannot actually move anywhere. I can actually do the same thing. Oops. By creating an arbitrary line, and then I'm going to select this point, this line, and then say make it midpoint coincidental, this one, and then make it midpoint here as well. If I just did coincident, I can actually move this here and here. What I actually needed to have done is actually make it midpoint. So I'm going to select this line, and say midpoint, then this one, this line, and then say midpoint again. So now I've achieved the same particular thing. Again, I have a habit of basically automatically hitting Control S. We're going to call this, you can actually look at different files that are there. I'm going to basically call this B, and then we're going to exit the sketch. Now if I select the extrude, because I have two close sketches, SolidWorks doesn't really know which needs to be extruded. So what I'm going to do is on this blind, I'm going to go on this location over here which says contours, and then I'm going to select the outer contour here. Since I want this extrude to go the other way, I can either drag the arrow the opposite direction, or I can click here and then flip the direction. So this I wanted it to be 40, actually maybe 80, I lied, and then we say okay. Now the sketch is hidden, so I don't want that. So what I'm actually going to do is drop, click on this plus. Now the sketch is shown again. Click on the sketch and I'm going to select extrude again. Now in the contour I'm going to select this little one, and then notice that by default it's selected 80. If I had it extrude inside, I won't see anything. So I'm going to basically reverse direction so that my extrude is in this particular direction. The two extrudes are automatically merged. So this happens because I've checked merge results over here. If I didn't want, or I wanted them to be separate, I would uncheck this merge results, in which case I'll have two objects over here. So I'll have this object, so the faces are different. So what I'm going to be doing now is actually extrude it along the, this should actually be the Y direction. So I'm going to kind of extrude it up. Since you probably realize I'm a bit lazy, so instead of actually recreating this particular drawing, I'm going to try to see if I can salvage the existing drawing that I have. So this one, I'm going to delete this shape, and then this one, and then now I'm left with my sketch. So what I'm going to do is select the sketch, and then I'm going to say edit the sketching plane, and then delete this right plane, and then I'm going to move it to the top plane, and then say OK. So notice that my sketch is magically moved from the right plane to the top plane here, and then now if I edit the sketch, it's fully constrained because I had basically done it to the original, and then all the axis directions are maintained, and then we have a fully constrained sketch. If I didn't like it, so I can actually do finish. After I finish, what I can actually do is kind of maybe move the sketch. I can select this particular point and this particular point, and then make them coincidental, right? And then I select exit sketch. I'll do file save as, and then I already saved it as a new version already, so I'm going to save it here. Next, what we are going to do is like before, I'm going to select this, extrude, and then I'm going to select the this sketch, move it to 160. Actually, let's do something slightly different. So I'm going to basically select the whole thing, and then now this has gone to 80, and then say OK. Now what I'm going to do is select this sketch, select extrude. Instead of blind, I'm going to say, oops, instead of from sketching plane, I'm going to say from surface or plane. So and then I'm going to select this particular plane, and then I'm going to have blind again, and for the profile, I'm just going to select this particular profile over here, and then say OK. Now I get my same L-shaped object, and then as usual, we're going to save this. So the next thing we're going to look at is trying to create slightly more complicated objects. So obviously we can create along the Z direction, which is not that difficult. Now we're going to try to build slightly more complicated shapes. So this is a table. If you did it along the Y direction, this is not that complicated. So it basically would create these particular shapes and then extrude it. So we'll really quickly see how that is done. Again, Control N, new part. I'm going to select the top plane now, like so, and then create my rectangle. What I'm going to do is smart dimension here. We're going to make this 100. We're going to make this 100. And then we're going to create a little rectangles here. And then smart dimension this. We'll call this say 10. We'll make this 10. And then what we're going to do is do something more interesting. Hit escape a few times to get rid of this. What I'm going to do is actually use a linear pattern. Make sure you unselect things that you don't need. And then what I'm going to do is use linear pattern here. So I'm going to go linear pattern. The distance I want is going to be 100 minus 10. So I want this to be 90. And then this is my original x-axis. The y, I want a y as well. So I'm going to go 2 here. And then this is also going to be the same thing. And then say OK. Now this is automatically created. This one, the dimensions aren't really fixed, right? So what I can actually do is if I make this and this to be coincidental or collinear, and then I can make this and this line to be collinear as well. So we can actually drag and see what is happening. So I need to basically make this one and this one collinear as well. And then the only thing that can change is this. Oh, actually what happened? I think I made it parallel, not collinear. Now my sketch is fully constrained, and then what I'm going to do is save. We'll call this VD, and then I'm going to select the sketch, extrude, select the outer one, extrude it by 10, that's good. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the legs, sketch, select this. Now here I'm going to select all 4 contours here. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to flip my direction, and then this obviously will need to be a little bit longer. I'm going to make it maybe 100, and then say OK. Right, so this is my table. So when you are creating complicated objects, try to see if you can actually combine the sketches, which will make your life a little bit easier. You can also try to figure out if you can actually extrude it along the X direction, which I'll leave it to your imagination. So essentially you would create one block, and then you would need to do an extrude cut. So this is the extrude cut over here. So just like extrude adds material, you can do extrude cut, which will remove material to create that particular shape. The next one is we're going to focus on is called revolve, which is used for axis symmetric or cylindrical surfaces. So this would basically be like this. You can also have a cup like with a hole like so, like my mug here. So you can have this. Basically the handle would be done separately, and then for this particular shape I can actually kind of create this particular shape. Obviously you can't create the coffee, but rest of it you can basically use the axis symmetric method. So let's basically try to create this cup here without the handle. So imagine I'm hiding this from you. So go Control N, new part. So when I do an axis symmetric, I need to figure out how I can actually make it. Like I need to select an axis about which I'm going to revolve the whole thing. So revolve is basically rotating about a circle. So this, I'm going to select the front plane. Let me show you the mug again. So this is my mug. So not very clean, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is basically there is a hole here, and then it's kind of closed at the end. So if I look at, imagine this is being cut, my object is basically going to look a little bit like so. I'm going to have this. So I'm going to have maybe like an edge here. So I'm going to have an edge, and then this is going to be the bottom line, and then I'm going to basically revolve it about this particular axis. And then in the bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically create like a small thickness. So this is the L shape, and then imagine if I'm rotating it about this axis, right? It's going to basically form my little cup. So let's see how that's done. So I'm going to do that about the front plane. So I select this front plane, new sketch, and then I'm going to create my L shape. So here I go here, like do. That's it. So this is my L shape. Now I have to dimension this. Obviously my thickness would probably be a little bit uniform, so I'm going to select this one, make it equal, smart dimension. From what I can see, this is probably like 2 millimeters or so. So this is 2. Now it's automatically scaled. I don't want that, so I'm going to basically select this. This is close to 20. This is maybe like 25 millimeters, and then the height is maybe like 60 millimeters. Right, scroll out and then say OK. Now I'm going to select my sketch, revolve, and then since this is already selected, the sketch, I'm going to select the axis. Actually, sketch wasn't selected, I lied. Select this. For the axis, I can basically select this particular shape and then say OK, and then this basically creates my mug, except that these edges are a little bit sharp. This one doesn't look so nice. right? I can basically spend a little bit more time creating the handle. So if I wanted to create the handle, so what I need to do is go back to the front view, normal to view, and then I'm going to create my handle on this side. So for the handle, we can make things a little bit interesting, but right now I'm just going to make it simple. So I'm going to have a rectangle handle like this. And then we're going to close. So exit. So now my handle is here. So what I am actually going to do is I'm going to extrude, and then I'm going to say 10 millimeters. Now I'm going to make it about the mid plane, and then say OK. So for those of you who are actually trying this, if you take a closer look, you see a little bit of a problem here, right? So what has actually happened is, if you zoom really nicely, you'll notice that there is a little bit of a gap here. So this doesn't work too well. So what I'm going to do is actually cheat a little bit. I'm going to go back to edit sketch, normal to view, and then instead of this being coincidental, I'm going to actually move this in a little bit. So I'm going to basically take this line and then move it into my cup. I need to be a little bit careful that I don't go too much in. Let me show you what happens in that case. So I'm going to say exit sketch. So now this is good, but if I moved it too much in, this part goes kind of into my cup, which is not very nice. So I need to fiddle around with it and then make sure everything works out okay. Right, so that's one way you can basically get this cup. I can suppress this if I don't want this. I'm just going to delete this for now. So now instead of the original extrude, if I edit and then I select, instead of this line 6, if I select this particular line and then say OK. So imagine this line is here. Now if I say edit feature and then instead of this line, I select this particular line and say OK. Now notice that it's revolved about a different axis, and then I have a hole in the middle. So the next thing we're going to look at is if you wanted to make a complicated shape, so you can basically do this using extrude cut. The next thing we're going to focus on is something known as a sweep. So sweep is basically used to create like an arbitrary shape. So you can imagine like if I wanted to create like this cone, and then imagine this is, instead of a straight cone, it's actually kind of like a weird squished up cone. The bottom here is an ellipse. The top here is an ellipse in the different direction. So this one, what I can do is basically sweep this particular curve along this particular way. Sweep is more generally used for a more complicated shape. So we can actually have this kind of the same shape. I can have it like squished about like so, and then do all sorts of weird stuff. So that's where the sweep is actually useful. So when we are dealing with sweep, there are 3 curves you need to be aware of. The first one, I haven't labeled that, is known as the profile. This is what is the shape that is being swept or squished about. The next curve that is important is known as the path. It's the direction along which the sweep is made. And finally, we have something called as a path curve, which helps you control the shape. So if you wanted to basically get the normals and the shapes from getting squished too much, what I would recommend doing is first create the path curve, and then we'd create a reference plane to the path curve perpendicular to the path, and then you'll create your guide. This is optional if you wanted to basically squish the shape. On the new plane that we created perpendicular to the path curve, we're going to create our profile. So we would most likely need to create something known as a pierce constraint. I'll show you what that is. The pierce constraint basically means that the curve is coincidental at the point the curve pierces the plane. The guide curve necessarily needs to have a pierce constraint, so this is only needed if you're using a guide curve. So you can actually try some other way and then see if it works. Usually there will be a little bit of a problem, and so that's what we're going to do. So again, switching here, Control N, part, Control S. We're going to save this as, we have E, and then we'll call this F. So now what I'm going to do is follow my advice. So I'm going to create the path curve. So on the front plane, I'm going to do this. And to make the path more fancy, I'm going to use my spline curve. So I'm going to select here, Make sure your spline isn't too curved initially, because there might be a problem when you're trying to sweep the curve. So this is like that, and then I'm going to say okay. I'm going to select create a new reference geometry plane, and then for the plane I'm going to select the curve as the first reference, make it perpendicular. The curve can be perpendicular in two different ways. So I'm going to select a second reference, select the bottom plane, bottom point, and then that will become the origin here, and then say okay. Now next I'm going to create is the guide curve. So I'm going to create the guide curve also on the front plane. So I'm going to go this, like create another spline, normal to view. Maybe I'm going to do like here. Right. So I have both the profile and the guide curve. Now I'm a little confused. So I don't know which one was my profile, which one was my guide curve, and then which one was my path curve. So what I'm going to do is actually rename this. So the easiest way to do it is click and then hold for a little bit and then click again. This will allow you to actually rename the curve. So this one was my path, and then I do the same thing here. This one is my guide, and then I'm going to create my profile, which is going to be on this particular plane. So for my profile, I'm going to select an ellipse. I'm going to select my ellipse arbitrarily, and then I'm going to go normal to view. Okay, I'm going to show you what happens if you do a coincidental constraint. So imagine I select this one, and then I said make it coincidental. So notice that it's actually not coincidental. So what's actually happening is it does something weird and then doesn't have the desired effect. So it actually kind of makes it coincidental on a projection. So if I actually want it to be coincidental at this point, I'm going to select the center point and then this curve. Make sure you select this curve, not the end point. And then I'm going to select pierce. Similarly, I'm going to select this, again this curve, and then I'm going to say make it a pierce constraint. Right? So now if you notice that this is basically pierced over here, and then this particular dimension, I'm just going to smart dimension it. So this, imagine I'm going to have it fixed at 60. So now my ellipse is fully constrained. So I'm going to say okay, save it again. I'm going to rename this to my profile. So we're going to select sweep, so which comes over here. So sweep, this is the profile. So for the profile, I'm going to select my here profile. For this path, I'm going to select here. So this is the shape that comes about. So notice that it doesn't really like the shape because of the fact that the curves are all over the place. It might actually complain. It says sweep cannot be completed. The geometry is self-intersecting. So what I actually need to do is, I'm not sure if this helps. So I need to actually go ahead and modify the profile and the edit sketches. So what I'm going to do is make it less pronounced. I'm going to maybe move these points here. So sometimes there might be an error. Basically this sketch is no longer passing through this plane. So what I need to do is discard, I'm going to go to the guide curve and then basically edit it and then drag the line a little bit lower. So now my shape looks a little bit different. So I tried creating a slightly different shape as well. This is kind of looking like a camel, so I did the same thing. Because I'm dealing with sweeps, so each time I do, because the sweep isn't really fixed, I might get a different shape. So the last one, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you, this is the shape I got. I'm going to show you how you'd use direct modeling. So direct modeling is sometimes frowned upon. So essentially what happens is you take a particular face and then just manipulate the face directly instead of trying to fiddle around trying to create a sketch. So I'll show you how that works. So the way you do it is you can go to insert feature or insert face and then use that method to actually create your direct modeling. So imagine I wanted to just extrude this face out. So what I did was I basically created a new axis. So let's delete that. So I'm going to select basically my front plane and then the right plane, and then I'm going to create reference geometry axes, and then this will create my axis over here. I'm going to say OK. Then what I'm going to go do is insert. Instead of features, I'm going to go to face, and then I say move. So I'm going to select here, I'm going to say I'm going to move this face, and then I'm going to move it by a particular distance, and then here for the direction I'm going to use this axis. So now I want it moving up, so I'm going to flip the direction, and you can make it any distance, you can offset, you can rotate, in which case my axis needs to be, actually it cannot be in this particular plane, it needs to be in the other plane. And then I say okay, now my turtle kind of has a head over here. The other kind of direct modeling you can do is actually do like a linear or a circular pattern. For the linear pattern we would obviously need two directions, right? So I'm going to create another axis. So this is the first axis. I'm going to create something in perpendicular to it. So I'm going to go these two planes, and then I'm going to go reference geometry axis, and then this is my other axis. I'm going to say okay. And then what I'm going to do is linear pattern. So I'm going to select for the first axis, I'm going to go along this direction. My second axis is going to go along this direction. The feature that I want to pattern, or I can select the body. So I'm going to select this, like my turtle, and then I can change the number I want in this particular direction. So I can have more here, and then change this distance. So if I wanted more, 90, let's make it 100. I can change this distance as well to make sure things are nicely separated out, and then say okay. So let's not do this. I'm going to select body and then select this particular body and then say okay. What we had previously done is known as a feature pattern, so I didn't really like that feature. So right now I have like 8 gooses. I can actually edit this feature and then suddenly decide, you know what, I don't want some of these. I can actually click here, instances to skip. So imagine I didn't want this one, and then maybe I didn't want this one, and then say okay. Now I have, even though I created a bigger pattern, I've been able to exclude some of it. So this basically concludes our quick video on basically building 3D objects in SolidWorks. So essentially we started out with what's known as an extrude, where we took a simple L shape and then extruded that shape, and then we did a circular sweep, and then a revolve, and then we did a sweep in this case. So this basically concludes our video, and thank you for watching it.